Chapter 11, The Lady in Blue. Oscar Collins was a cop's cop. He worked his way up the ranks, starting with graveyard beat, to vice, and everything in between. Finally, his dream job came. Oscar worked homicide, and he was damn good at it. Oscar had certainly been around the block. At 56, the African-American was still in better shape than the bulk of the detectives. He was tall and lean, not overwhelmingly muscular, but he could flat stand his ground if need be. He was nearing retirement age, but there was not 1 ounce of Danny Glover in him. He was not too old for this shit. So, he was more than a bit surprised when he was assigned a new partner, and not a seasoned veteran like himself. A rookie, no less. This new detective didn't work her way up the food chain. She never walked the beat, at least not in San Francisco. She never spent nights on the streets, as he and his compatriots had. She was a mystery. It was like she came out of nowhere. But the lieutenants were high on her. She was to be a shining star on the force, the flavor of the month. Oscar didn't care much for her. She didn't do the idle chat thing. He knew less than zero about her. Family? It never came up, so he didn't ask. Was she married? No idea. He tried to engage her on several occasions, but she'd mostly respond with one word or vague answers. If he didn't know better, he'd think she had something to hide. Artemis did have something to hide. She found herself on Earth several months ago, not knowing where she was or how she got there. So she did the best she could. The Greek goddess of the hunt could certainly do one thing well, and that was hunting. Soon she realized that after being homeless for a number of weeks, she needed to do something drastic. She shed her tattered attire and braided her matted hair. She pulled herself together, stealing a set of respectable clothing from a Goodwill shop. She marched right into the police station and asked for a job. The cop behind the desk laughed at her, but she was persistent, so he gave her an application. She was stumped on the first question. What was her name? Artemis seemed too old, too archaic, and too godlike for this version of Earth. Diana, though, that might fit the bill. She hastily scrawled her Roman counterpart's name. But then, they wanted a last name as well. Lake Nemi was a sanctuary of Artemis. Nimorensis, that was the full name, but it seemed a bit too long, too hard on the mortal tongue. She opted to abbreviate it, and thus Diana Nemo came into existence. The other questions were challenging as well. Where did she live? What were her qualifications? Did she have any other jobs in the past? She realized she was being watched. Words were exchanged behind her back. Jokes about the homeless girl who wanted to be a cop. But opportunity always knocks. Best open the door. A crazed man entered the station waving a gun. The officer behind the desk immediately charged him, but was a tad too slow. He was shot in the face. In a quick turn of events, the man seized a younger cop and held the gun against his head. The other cops in the station held their weapons on the crazed man, but could not fire. They could not risk the life of their colleague. Artemis, now Diana Nemo, did not hesitate. She dropped the application on the floor and concocted a plan. She was clearly the last person he was expecting to make a move. So that's exactly what she did. In a flash, Diana was behind the man. Before he could react, she kicked the back of his knees, dropping him to the ground. She rolled on top of him and quickly knocked the gun from his hand. Diana applied a rear choke lock, and the man was completely incapacitated. The police officers came running. One kicked the gun into the corner. Another checked on his dying friend. It took 3 officers to force Diana to remove this chokehold. It was serendipity. The officer who had briefly been taken hostage was the stepson of the chief of police. The chief watched the video over and over. He loved what he saw from Diana. She was admitted to the police academy immediately, where she proved to be superior both physically and mentally. She excelled at running and tackling. She had never fired a weapon before, but picked it up quickly, and soon she was amongst the most accurate of shooters. It was actually easier than a bow for her. Just point and squeeze. She didn't even appear to mind when they pepper sprayed her face. It hurt, to be sure, but wincing seemed a sign of weakness. So, Diana averted all that Oscar went through. No moving up the ranks, no paying her dues. She was immediately assigned homicide, and because she was still quite rough around the edges, Oscar was given the task of training her. Needless to say, she was less than popular among the force. Who was this bitch? The questions flew. Diana was very pretty, which was not an advantage in this case. Her sandy blonde hair, perfect skin, and pert, upright breasts made her the center of attention. The station was essentially a boys' club. The more gregarious men hit on her relentlessly. Naturally, she turned them down. She had never touched a mortal in her life, but this was certainly not the way it was perceived. Whispers emerged. Lesbian and dyke were common, although in choosing her last name, she had little idea of what it meant from a popular culture standpoint. Nemo began, "Something fishy this way comes," as she entered rooms. Still, she was a shining star with a glorious future in the making. Would she be sabotaged, or would they ride the coattails? Oscar didn't give a shit either way. He was a serious man, above the partisan police locker room. He'd accomplished all he needed in this lifetime. He had made countless arrests, including 2 major ones, a serial rapist and a contract for hired killer. He had the accommodations and the pension to back it up. He'd retire and fix old cars or something like that. Maybe he'd even catch up on his Netflix. Diana was his project, probably his last one. She was possibly the last thing on the police bucket list, training the new bird so she could fly on her own. And, if he did his job well, she would soar above the clouds. In his heart, though, he was pessimistic. She was so rough and undisciplined, he feared a visit from internal affairs would be on her growth chart. She was quick with a punch before flashing her badge. She twisted an arm once so hard it broke. He always backed her up during questioning sessions, but he was rapidly growing tired of it. She was a heartbeat away from a brutality suit, and that wasn't going to drag him down. He noted that most rookies always wanted to drive. He wasn't having any of that, but he found it odd that she never asked. She probably didn't know her way around so well, but he knew for a fact that her lowest scores came on the driving section of the exam. She must have been given a pass, like it seemed she did for everything else. Still, it was hard to argue with results. Arrests increased, as did his stature. Diana was a wild card, but well thought of by her superiors. They were also his superiors. No sense in fighting it, he told himself. Train her the best you can. He would subtly torment her at times. "There's been a shooting, Diana. Have you ever been in the hood?" Diana shook her head. She had been in the woods. How different could it be?